Sarah wheezed to a halt during the 2-mile run, finishing 15 minutes behind the slowest recruit. Everyone thought she'd washed out. But when Colonel Brooks projected her Olympic shooting scores onto the briefing room wall, jaws dropped. Her weakness had convinced the base infiltrator she wasn't the sniper hunting him. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The morning air at Fort Carson cut like a blade, sharp and cold at 0600 hours, and Sarah Chen felt every molecule of it burn in her lungs as she forced herself across the finish line of the 2-mile run. Her time flashed on the sergeant's stopwatch. 21 minutes and 47 seconds. The slowest recruit had finished at 16:32. Sarah had calculated every step, every labored breath, every stumble that looked authentic enough to sell the performance. Her oversized Army PT uniform hung loose on her 5'6" frame, deliberately chosen 2 sizes too large to make her appear smaller, weaker, less capable than she was. Sweat soaked through the gray fabric, and her hands found her knees as she doubled over, chest heaving with the kind of exhaustion that came from running just fast enough to look genuinely spent without actually pushing her real limits. 47 recruits stood in formation watching her pathetic display. Some smirked. Others rolled their eyes. A few looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to feel pity or disgust. Drill Sergeant Marcus Webb stood 6'2" with 20 years of service etched into the lines of his weathered face. And he shook his head slowly like a man witnessing something that personally offended him. "Chen," his voice carried across the training grounds with the authority of 2 decades spent breaking in soldiers. "My grandmother runs faster, and she's been dead for 6 years. Jake Morrison, 23 years old and built like the college linebacker he used to be, laughed openly from his position in formation. His voice carried just loud enough for everyone to hear. How'd she even pass basic? Diversity quota? Sarah let the words hit her. Let them settle into the performance. She gasped between words, playing the part perfectly. "Sorry, Sergeant. Tried my best." Webb's expression hardened into something between disappointment and anger. "Your best? That wasn't your best. That was pathetic. Hit the showers. We'll discuss your future here later." Sarah nodded, unable to trust herself to speak again without breaking character, and trudged toward the barracks with her head down and shoulders slumped. 15 minutes behind. Perfect. He'll think I'm no threat now. The thought ran through her mind with cold precision as she walked the gauntlet of judgment. But something else caught her attention in that moment. A figure stood at the administrative building window, 3rd floor, wearing civilian clothes. The distance was roughly 200 meters, but Sarah's eyes were trained to pick out details at 3 times that range. The figure held something. A phone, maybe? Or binoculars. Too interested in a routine PT test. Too focused on the formation. She filed the observation away and kept walking, every step a careful piece of theater. The women's barracks shower facility was empty at 06:04, 5 hours. Most of the other female recruits had already finished and headed to breakfast. Sarah stood under the lukewarm spray and let the water wash away the sweat, while her mind stayed sharp and focused. 3 hours earlier, at 0330 hours, she had completed her real morning routine. 45-minute run at a 6:30 pace, 200 push-ups in sets of 50, Olympic training regimen that she maintained in the dark hours before anyone else stirred. That workout left her energized. This morning's deliberately slow jog left her frustrated but satisfied with the performance. The sound of voices drifted from the changing area, and Sarah stilled, listening. Elena Vasquez, 25, former police officer with a military family background, spoke first. "She's going to get someone killed in the field." That was Amanda Torres, 22, supply specialist with a sharp tongue. Elena's response came more measured, uncertain. "Maybe she's got skills we don't know about?" Amanda's laugh echoed off the tile walls. "Like what? Professional last-place finisher?" More laughter. Sarah counted to 10 in Mandarin, Her mother's language, the syllables forming silently in her mind. The counting centered her, reminded her of the mission parameters. The package. That's what Colonel Brooks had called it 3 days ago. Classified intelligence stolen from the base 3 weeks prior, traced through a digital trail that led directly to someone in this training cycle. Someone who had access. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who thought they were invisible, just like Sarah was pretending to be. 72 hours earlier, at 0800 hours, Sarah had stood in Colonel James Brooks's office for the briefing that would define the next month of her life. The office was Spartan in the way that career military spaces often were. Steel desk, single window that overlooked the rifle range in what Sarah appreciated as an ironic detail. Classified files locked in a cabinet that probably held secrets spanning decades. American flag in the corner standing rigid. Photos of Brooks with various dignitaries covering one wall in a carefully arranged display of a life spent in service. Brooks himself was 51, 5'11", silver-haired in a way that suggested distinguished rather than old, with 28 years of service in Army intelligence. He sat behind his desk, while Major Lisa Reeves stood near the window. Reeves was 38, 5'9", Army CID with a reputation for closing cases that others couldn't crack. Captain Chen. Brooks began without preamble. You'll enter the training cycle as a complete recruit. No rank, no acknowledgement of your service record. Sarah stood at attention. The infiltrator is inside the cycle? Major Reeves answered. We've narrowed it to 12 possibles. All enlisted in the last 6 weeks. Timing matches the breach. Brooks pulled up images on a screen mounted to the wall. The stolen intelligence included base security protocols, overseas operations schedules, and most critically, the identities of undercover operatives in hostile territories. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, places where blown cover meant death. The cost of the breach had already been calculated in blood. 3 agents compromised, 2 confirmed KIA. The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Sarah would go undercover as a struggling recruit. Her apparent weakness would make her invisible to the infiltrator. She would observe, identify, gather evidence. Timeline was 4 weeks maximum. Intelligence suggested the infiltrator would pass the stolen data during the upcoming field training exercise. Sarah's cover story was airtight. Former logistics officer trying to transition to a combat role, barely passed entrance requirements. No combat experience, no special skills, nothing to draw attention. But her real background was something else entirely. Captain Sarah Chen, Army Special Operations, Olympic silver medalist, 50-meter rifle, 2016 Rio. 7 confirmed kills in Afghanistan, 3 of them high-value targets whose names were still classified. Longest confirmed shot was 847 meters, in conditions that would have made most snipers pack up and wait for better weather. Current qualification record was 67 consecutive perfect scores, 40 out of 40, every single time. For 4 years straight. Brooks leaned forward, hands folded on the desk. The infiltrator is smart, professional, possibly foreign intelligence. You slip once, they'll vanish. And we'll never recover the full network. Sarah understood. This wasn't just about catching one person. It was about finding everyone they'd compromised, everyone they'd sold secrets to, every thread of the web. Are there any questions, Captain? Brooks asked. Sarah had only one. When do I start? By 1,200 hours. Sarah was lying on her bunk in the barracks, appearing to nurse sore muscles, while other recruits were at lunch. The barracks was quiet, empty, exactly what she needed. She reviewed the mental files she'd built on the 12 suspects. Jake Morrison, 23, 6'1", former college athlete with too much confidence and a mouth that ran before his brain engaged. Too obvious, too loud, but intelligence had flagged unexplained cash deposits in his account. Possible, but unlikely. David Park, 21, 5'9", computer science background from MIT. nervous demeanor that could be social anxiety or could be guilt. His technical skills fit the profile perfectly. Worth watching. Elena Vasquez, 25, 5'7", ex-police officer from a military family. Recent divorce. Financial stress. Motive and opportunity. Sergeant Marcus Webb himself was on the list. 42 years old, 20-year veteran with access to everything and the kind of trust that made him invisible, above suspicion. Which was exactly why he had to be considered. Thomas Reed, civilian contractor, 35, 5'10", IT specialist who repaired computers and maintained network security. He'd been seen watching PT tests with unusual interest. Always had his phone out. Access to networks meant access to classified data. Prime suspect. The list continued. Amanda Torres, supply specialist who handled logistics and could smuggle anything off base. Kevin Briggs, combat medic who deployed twice and suddenly requested transfer to training command. Rachel Kim, intelligence analyst with gambling debts. Lieutenant Joshua Martinez, junior officer with an administrative role and a record that was too clean, too perfect. Sophia Brennan, communications specialist who handled encrypted comms and had recently returned from overseas. Carlos Mendez, weapons instructor with access to the armory and range schedules, and the 12th name on the list was blank. A mystery figure. Someone Sarah hadn't identified yet, someone possibly using a false identity, someone smart enough to hide in plain sight. Sarah's observations so far had narrowed the field slightly. Morrison watched her with contempt, not the calculated interest of someone assessing a threat. Park avoided everyone equally, his nervous energy consistent across all interactions. But Reed was different. The civilian contractor watched everyone. Always had his phone out. Always seemed to be documenting things that didn't need documentation. Sarah turned her head slightly and looked out the barracks window. There he was again. Thomas Reed standing near the obstacle course, phone raised, taking photos. Of what? Training equipment that hadn't changed in months? Or was he documenting something else? Patterns of personnel movement? Identifying which soldiers went where at what times? Building a profile of the base's routines and vulnerabilities? Sarah committed the observation to memory and closed her eyes, letting her body rest while her mind continued working through scenarios and possibilities. The mess hall at 1,800 hours was chaos controlled by routine. 200 personnel moved through the space, collecting trays, finding seats, the noise level rising with conversations and the clatter of silverware on plates. Sarah carried her tray carefully, scanning for an empty seat, when Jake Morrison's foot shot out from under the table. She saw it coming. Could have avoided it easily, but that wasn't the part she was playing. The trip was perfect, the tray flying from her hands, food scattering across the floor in a spectacular display of clumsiness. Laughter erupted from Morrison's table. Sarah landed on her knees, the impact jarring but not painful, and the flush that spread across her face was genuine anger that she channeled into appearing embarrassed. Morrison's voice carried across the mess hall. "Oops. Guess you failed the walking test, too." His buddy chimed in. "She should just quit. Save us all the embarrassment." Sarah kept her voice quiet, defeated. "It's fine. Accident." Elena Vasquez appeared, standing over Morrison's table with her arms crossed. "Morrison, that's enough." Morrison leaned back, grinning. "What? You her bodyguard now? She needs to learn this isn't a place for people who can't hack it." The confrontation was escalating when Sergeant Webb entered through the main doors. His eyes took in the scene immediately. "Chen, clean that up. Morrison, you've got extra duty tonight." Morrison started to protest. "Sergeant, I didn't." Webb cut him off. "I don't care. You're representing this unit. Act like it." Sarah gathered the spilled food on her hands and knees, aware of every eye on her, aware that this humiliation was necessary and calculated, and part of the mission. Then Thomas Reed entered the mess hall. He glanced at the scene, his expression neutral except for the slight smirk that played at the corner of his mouth. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving across the screen in what could have been texting but felt like more. Documentation. Assessment. He was cataloging the unit dynamics, identifying the weak link, confirming that Sarah Chen was broken, humiliated, not a threat. Her cover was working perfectly. She kept her head down and continued cleaning, while Reed found a seat and continued whatever he was doing on his phone. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Colonel Brooks entered the mess hall, an unusual occurrence that immediately drew attention. The room didn't fall silent, but conversations dropped to murmurs. Brooks scanned the space, his eyes resting briefly on Sarah, still kneeling on the floor, then moving across the assembled personnel. His voice carried authority that demanded attention without needing to be raised. All training personnel, briefing room 0800 tomorrow. Mandatory. No exceptions. He left without further explanation. Sarah finished cleaning and disposed of the ruined food, her mind racing. Something was about to change. Brooks wouldn't call a mandatory briefing without reason. The timeline was accelerating. Either they'd found something new or they were forcing the infiltrator's hand. She returned to the barracks that night and lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, while other recruits whispered speculation about tomorrow's briefing. Sarah didn't speculate. She prepared, mentally reviewed her cover story, checked for any inconsistencies, made certain that when the moment came, she would be ready for whatever Colonel Brooks had planned. The infiltrator was out there, watching, waiting, thinking they were safe. Tomorrow that would change. Tomorrow the careful game of deception would reach its next phase. Sarah closed her eyes and let sleep take her, the kind of controlled rest that came from years of training, knowing that the mission was about to accelerate, and she needed to be sharp for what came next. The briefing room at Fort Carson held stadium seating for 100 personnel, and at 0800 hours the next morning, it contained 73 bodies, filling the space with tension thick enough to taste. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow across rows of seats that faced a projector screen mounted beside an American flag that hung perfectly still in the climate-controlled air. Sarah Chen entered through the main doors and chose a seat in the middle section, not front where eager soldiers sat, not back where those trying to hide positioned themselves, but middle where she could observe everything while remaining unremarkable. Whispers rippled through the assembled personnel. Recruits sat beside drill sergeants, who sat beside officers, who sat beside civilian contractors, an unusual mixing that only heightened the mystery of why they were here. Jake Morrison's voice carried from 3 rows back, loud enough to be heard but quiet enough to maintain deniability. Maybe. They're finally cutting the dead weight. Laughter followed, quickly suppressed when Colonel James Brooks entered with Major Lisa Reeves at his side. Brooks moved with the purposeful stride of a man who had commanded attention for 28 years and knew exactly how to wield it. At ease, this won't take long. The words were simple, but they did nothing to ease the tension crackling through the room. Sarah kept her expression neutral, hands folded in her lap, aware that somewhere in this room Thomas Reed was watching. She had spotted him when she entered. Back corner seat, phone resting in his lap. His attention seemingly casual, but his body language too still, too controlled. Brooks clicked a remote, and the projector screen illuminated with data. We've been running an evaluation of this training cycle. Performance metrics, aptitude assessments, psychological profiles. The screen displayed fitness test results arranged in ranked order. Morrison's name sat at the top. First place, his time of 14 minutes and 8 seconds displayed with digital precision. David Park appeared 8th. The list continued downward through 47 names until it reached the bottom where Sarah Chen's name sat alone in last place, her time of 21 minutes and 47 seconds, a stark contrast to everyone above her. Uncomfortable shuffling filled the room. Some people glanced toward Sarah. Morrison smirked. That same self-satisfied expression he had worn yesterday when his foot tripped her in the mess hall. Brooks continued without acknowledging the reaction. Physical fitness is crucial, but it's not the only measure of a soldier's worth. He clicked the remote again, and the screen changed to display new text. Specialized Skills Assessment. Some of you have specialized backgrounds we haven't fully disclosed. It's time to correct that. The atmosphere shifted, confusion replacing certainty. Brooks clicked again, and the screen displayed a new header. Marksmanship records. The first slide showed generic shooting scores from the recruits. Standard qualification numbers that meant little to anyone not familiar with military standards. Marksmanship wins wars. A soldier who can't shoot is a liability. A soldier who can shoot exceptionally is an asset. Brooks let the words settle. Let anticipation build. Then clicked the remote with deliberate slowness. The screen changed to display Olympic shooting records. Rio 2016. An image appeared, crisp and clear and undeniable. An Olympic podium with 3 athletes standing in their designated positions, flags of their nations displayed on the electronic boards behind them. The center position, silver medal territory, held a younger version of Sarah Chen. Her hair was shorter then, pulled back tight, her face unlined by the years that followed, but unmistakably her. The Chinese and American flags displayed side by side above her position. The event details appeared below the image. 50-meter rifle, 3 positions, women's division, score of 458.8 points. Olympic silver medal. The room fell into complete silence. 3 seconds passed where no one moved, no one breathed, no one processed what they were seeing. Then Morrison's smirk froze on his face and slowly melted like ice under direct sun. Heads swiveled toward Sarah in a wave of motion that rippled through the assembled personnel. Elena Vasquez's jaw dropped open in an expression of pure shock. David Park whispered 2 words that carried in the silence. Holy shit. Sergeant Webb's eyes narrowed, but not in anger, in reassessment. In the realization that everything he thought he knew about the struggling recruit in his formation was a carefully constructed lie, and in the back corner, Thomas Reed stiffened in his seat. His phone screen went dark. The color drained from his face in a visible transformation that Sarah caught in her peripheral vision. Brooks's voice continued, measured and authoritative, each word dropping into the silence like stones into still water. Captain Sarah Chen. Not just Olympic silver medalist. The screen changed again, displaying a military service record with blocks of text, redacted in thick black bars that hid classified information but left enough visible to tell the story. Army Special Operations. 7 confirmed kills in combat zones. The next slide appeared, page after page of range qualification scores scrolling past, every single one displaying the same perfect result. 40 out of 40. Maximum possible score. 67 consecutive perfect qualification scores over 4 years. Then the screen went black except for a single number in white text, large enough to be read from the back row. 847. Brooks let the number hang there, let people wonder what it meant, before delivering the explanation. Longest confirmed kill shot. 847 meters. Hostile territory. High-value target. 1 shot. Sarah remained seated with her hands folded in her lap, her expression unchanged, making no eye contact with anyone around her. Inside her mind, the calculation was already complete. The mission just changed. He's forcing the infiltrator's hand. Brooks delivered his final statement with the weight of command behind every syllable. Captain Chen has been operating undercover for the past 3 weeks. Some of you treated her with respect. His pause was meaningful, his eyes moving deliberately toward Morrison's position. Others did not. She wasn't failing. She was evaluating. And so was I. This briefing is classified. Nobody discusses this outside this room. Dismissed. The word released 73 people into motion, but the silence persisted as personnel filed toward the exits. Sarah stood and walked alone down the aisle. A path cleared around her, as if she had become something dangerous, something that required distance and respect. And careful approach. Morrison stood against the hallway wall, his face red, unable or unwilling to make eye contact as she passed. Elena Vasquez started to approach, took 3 steps, then hesitated, and stopped. David Park broke through the invisible barrier first, approaching with nervous energy. Captain Chen. That was incredible. Sarah's voice remained neutral, professional. It's just shooting, Park. No. I mean, the Olympics. We had no idea. You weren't supposed to. The exchange was brief, and Sarah's attention was already elsewhere, scanning the hallway for the one person who mattered. Where is Thomas Reed? She spotted him slipping out a side exit, moving with the kind of careful speed that suggested purpose without panic. Sarah followed at a distance, maintaining casual pace, just another soldier moving through the base on routine business. Reed headed toward the IT building, checking over his shoulder twice. Movements that confirmed what Sarah already suspected. He wasn't running. Not yet. But he was moving pieces into position. She memorized his route but didn't follow directly. Instead, stopping at a corner and watching him disappear into the building through a side entrance. The cover was blown, but the mission continued. The infiltrator now knew she was a threat, knew she was hunting him, knew that the weak recruit was actually the most dangerous person on the base. He would either run or accelerate his timeline. Either way, she needed to catch him in the act, needed proof that would hold up under scrutiny, needed to stop him before the stolen intelligence reached foreign hands. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in Colonel Brooks' office, with Major Reeves standing near the window, the three of them conducting a debrief that would determine the next phase of the operation. We just painted a target on your back. Reeves' voice carried concern, masked as statement of fact. That was the point. He knows I'm hunting him now. Sarah's response was calm, certain. Brooks provided an update. Reed left the base immediately after the briefing, signed out for equipment pickup. He'll be back by 1400. He's not running. He's contacting his handler. Sarah understood the pattern, had seen it before in other operations. We've got surveillance on him, if he meets anyone. Reeves let the sentence trail off, but Sarah finished the thought. He won't. He's a professional. He'll use a dead drop or encrypted communications. The strategy came together through dialogue. Field training exercise was scheduled for tomorrow, live fire range combined with overnight tactical scenario spanning 8,000 acres of varied terrain. Perfect opportunity to pass physical intelligence that couldn't be intercepted digitally. Sarah would participate as herself now. No more hiding, no more pretending to be weak. Reed would be there as IT support for the communication systems. They needed to catch him with the physical intelligence, needed to document the transfer, needed to capture not just Reed but his handler and anyone else in the network. Brooks revealed the full stakes. There's more at stake. The stolen intelligence includes your identity, Captain, and the identities of 14 other deep-cover operatives. If that gets to foreign intelligence, we'll lose agents in North Korea, Iran, Russia. Some of them have families who don't even know what they really do. The weight of 14 lives settled onto Sarah's shoulders, but she carried it the same way she carried everything else. With quiet competence and absolute commitment. He won't get the chance. Brooks opened a case on his desk, revealing a custom rifle built to Sarah's Olympic specifications. The weapon she had trained with for years before her service record required different tools for different missions. It's been waiting for you. Sarah lifted the rifle. Felt the familiar weight, the perfect balance, the way it settled into her grip like an extension of her own body. Tomorrow the game would end, one way or another. The afternoon brought reactions and reckonings as the base absorbed the revelation and adjusted to the new reality. At 1,300 hours, Sarah stood at the rifle range, finally shooting without pretense, without holding back, without hiding what she could do. A crowd gathered to watch, drawn by rumors and curiosity, and the need to see if the briefing had been real or some elaborate deception. Sarah loaded, aimed, fired. 300 meters. Perfect center mass. Loaded, aimed, fired. The string of shots continued, each one finding the exact point she intended, proving beyond doubt that the Olympic silver medal was earned, that the perfect qualification scores were real, that Captain Sarah Chen was exactly what Colonel Brooks claimed. Sergeant Webb approached while she was reloading, standing at a respectful distance until she acknowledged him. "Captain, I owe you an apology. Sarah kept her focus on the target downrange. "You were doing your job, Sergeant. I should have looked past the surface. Most people don't. That's the point." She loaded another round, acquired the target, fired. Perfect center mass. Webb watched the shot, then spoke quietly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're on our side." At 1,500 hours in the barracks, Jake Morrison approached Sarah's bunk, where she was packing gear for the field exercise. He stood awkwardly, a man trying to find words for something he had never needed to say before. "I was an asshole." Yes. The single word hung between them until Morrison continued. "I judged you without knowing. You judged me based on what you saw. That's what you're trained to do." Sarah finally looked at him directly. "Does that mean you're not pissed?" "I'm too busy to be pissed, Morrison. There's work to do. If you need backup out there, I'm good at following orders." Sarah allowed herself the story's first smile. Small but genuine. I'll keep that in mind. At 1,600 hours, Sarah positioned herself outside the IT building with clear sight lines to both entrances. Thomas Reed returned to base carrying a laptop bag, walking with normal stride, no obvious signs of stress or panic. But his routine had changed. Usually he entered through the main door. Today he used the side entrance, the same one he had used that morning. Sarah noted the deviation, filed it away with all the other observations, and understood. He's preparing something. Tomorrow night during the field exercise, Reed would make his move, and Sarah would be waiting. The sun was setting at 1,900 hours when the field training exercise officially began. Fort Carson training grounds stretched across 8,000 acres of varied terrain, hills giving way to forest, giving way to open ground, natural features that made it perfect for tactical training. 47 recruits divided into squads received their briefing from Sergeant Webb. Tactical scenario was straightforward. Secure an objective, an abandoned building complex 3 miles north. By dawn, live rounds, night operations, communications equipment. Everything designed to simulate real combat conditions. Thomas Reed and 2 other civilian contractors would operate communications relay stations positioned strategically across the area. Temperature was already dropping, 45 degrees and falling, wind picking up from the west carrying the smell of pine and dirt and approaching weather. Clouds obscured the moon, good for cover but hard for visibility. Exactly the kind of conditions that separated competent soldiers from exceptional ones. Sarah received her squad assignment. Squad 3 with Elena Vasquez, David Park, and 4 other recruits. Morrison would lead Squad 1. Colonel Brooks would observe from the command post. Major Reeves would run surveillance on Reed, tracking his movements, monitoring his communications, waiting for him to make contact with his handler. At 1,930 hours, the squads moved out into gathering darkness. Sarah's squad took the northern approach, moving through forest with tactical spacing and noise discipline. But Sarah's attention was on something else. Reed's communications station was positioned on a hilltop with clear sight lines to the objective and to a forest road that ran along the base perimeter, technically off-limits but accessible to anyone willing to bend regulations. Perfect location for a handoff. Sarah moved close to Elena Vasquez and spoke quietly. "I need to break off from the squad." Elena's response came after only a brief pause. "This is about the briefing, about why you're really here. I can't explain. I need you to cover for me." "How long?" 2 hours. Maybe less. Elena held her gaze for 3 seconds, making her own assessment, her own decision. "I'll handle Webb. Be careful, Captain." At 2,000 hours when the squad entered dense forest, Sarah slipped away using natural cover and years of training that made her invisible even to people looking directly at her position. She circled toward Reed's station 800 meters away, carrying her custom rifle with night vision scope and rangefinder. She took position on an elevated ridge 600 meters from the communications station and settled in to watch and wait. Reed sat at his station with laptop open and radio equipment spread across a portable table. Exactly what a civilian IT contractor should be doing during a training exercise. but every 10 minutes he lifted binoculars and scanned the forest road below. Movements too regular, too purposeful. At 2,047 hours, a vehicle approached on the forest road. Civilian SUV. No markings, no visible identification. It parked 400 meters from Reed's position, and the driver remained inside. Reed checked his watch, nervous energy visible even at this distance. Sarah's assessment was immediate and certain. It's happening now. The handoff is tonight. She needed proof, needed to catch him with the intelligence, needed to document the transfer in a way that would survive legal scrutiny. She moved closer, 400 meters now, using shadows and terrain to remain invisible. Reed started walking toward the vehicle, each step taking him further from his station, further from any legitimate reason to be away from his post. Sarah tracked him through her scope, crosshairs following his movement with practiced precision. Her finger rested beside the trigger, not on it, not yet. She needed him alive for questioning, needed him to lead her to the full network. Reed reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Sarah's breath steadied into the rhythm she had learned at the Olympics and perfected in combat. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. The crosshairs centered on his hand, on the envelope that contained stolen intelligence worth 14 lives. Then a voice spoke behind her, barely above a whisper, but close enough to be unmistakable. Don't move. Sarah froze with her rifle still aimed at Thomas Reed, 400 meters away. The voice behind her cutting through the darkness like a blade through silk. The voice was male, familiar in the way that voices become familiar after weeks of careful observation and cataloging. Recognition came instantly. Lieutenant Joshua Martinez, 29 years old, one of the 12 suspects on her original list. Junior officer with an administrative role and a record that had been too clean, too perfect, too carefully constructed to be entirely real. Easy, Captain. Let's talk about this. Martinez's tone carried false calm, the kind of manufactured composure that barely masked desperation underneath. Sarah kept her position, rifle steady, her voice equally controlled when she responded. Talk about what, Lieutenant? About how you're going to let Reed complete his delivery, and then you're going to forget you saw anything. The words landed with the weight of confession, of revelation, of everything Sarah had been hunting, finally stepping into the light. Martinez wasn't just on the suspect list. He was the handler, the architect, the one pulling strings while Reed played the role of courier. But Martinez was Army intelligence. Supposedly one of the good ones, which meant this was either a legitimate black operation running outside normal channels, or Martinez was the real traitor, hiding behind his uniform and his clearances and his access to everything that mattered. You think you're hunting a foreign agent. You're not. This is bigger than you know. Martinez's voice carried an edge now, urgency bleeding through the false calm. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, calculating odds and angles and the likelihood that a legitimate operation would reveal itself this way. In the dark, at gunpoint, without proper authorization or chain of command. Show me authorization. Official orders. Her demand was simple, direct, the kind of thing that should be easy to produce if Martinez was telling the truth. It doesn't work like that, and you know it. Martinez's response confirmed what Sarah had already concluded. Then I don't work like that either, Lieutenant. Lower your weapon. I can't do that. Too much is at stake. You're right about that. The exchange was tense, quiet, 2 professionals negotiating over stolen secrets and 14 lives hanging in the balance. Then Sarah saw it. Martinez's hand trembled slightly, just enough to catch in her peripheral vision, just enough to break the illusion of professional composure. His weapon wavered, uncertainty making his grip unsteady, and Sarah understood with absolute clarity that he wasn't intelligence, wasn't running a black operation, wasn't anything except desperate and trapped and willing to kill to protect whatever deal he had made. The question cut through pretense, and Martinez's response came forced out under the weight of being seen, being known, being caught. Enough to clear my debts. Enough to disappear. The confession spilled out in fragments. Reed doesn't even know. He thinks he's working for Army counterintelligence, running a sting. I recruited him, fed him the intel piece by piece. He thinks he's catching a mole, and you're about to ruin everything. The full scope of the betrayal crystallized in Sarah's mind. Martinez had manipulated Reed, used him as an unwitting courier, built an entire operation on lies and exploitation, all while wearing the uniform and collecting a paycheck and betraying every agent whose identity sat on that USB drive. Sarah moved with the speed that came from Olympic training and combat experience and years of conditioning that made her body respond faster than conscious thought. She spun, rifle barrel knocking Martinez's pistol aside in a precise strike that sent his shot wide, the crack of gunfire splitting through the trees. She drove the rifle stock into his solar plexus with controlled force. Enough to drop him, but not enough to cause permanent damage. Martinez fell gasping, weapon tumbling from his grip, and Sarah was on him instantly with her rifle pointed at his head. "Stay down! Don't make me shoot you!" But the gunshot had consequences that rippled outward faster than Sarah could contain. 400 meters away, Reed heard the crack of the pistol, saw the muzzle flash, understood that something had gone wrong. He abandoned the handoff and ran back toward his communications station. The SUV's engine roared to life, tires spinning on dirt as the vehicle fled down the forest road, taking Martinez's handler with it and leaving Reed exposed and alone. Sarah had seconds to decide. Secure Martinez or stop Reed. She couldn't do both. The choice was tactical, calculated, based on which target represented the greater threat. Martinez was injured, weaponless, going nowhere. Reed had the intelligence, had the means to escape, had to be stopped before evidence disappeared forever. Sarah pulled zip ties from her tactical vest and secured Martinez to a tree with restraints tight enough to hold, but positioned to allow circulation. She grabbed her rifle and sprinted down the ridge, legs pumping, lungs burning, covering ground with the efficient stride of someone who ran 6-minute miles when she wasn't pretending to be slow. 350 meters separated her from Reed's position. He was reaching his communications station, grabbing his laptop, pulling a USB drive from a hidden pocket. A motorcycle sat beside the station, his escape route, engine starting with a mechanical roar that carried through the night air. The SUV was already gone, disappeared down the forest road into darkness. Sarah ran 50 meters down the ridge and dropped to prone position, rifle settling into her shoulder with practiced precision. Reed was mounting the motorcycle, one leg swinging over, hands finding the controls. Range was 300 meters. Wind estimation came from watching tree movement, approximately 12 miles per hour from the west. Elevation put her 30 feet above the target. Night vision scope showed thermal imaging. Reed's heat signature bright against the cooling motorcycle. Target would be moving in 3 seconds. Sarah's calculation was rapid, instinctive, built on years of training that had become muscle memory. She couldn't kill him. She needed the intelligence he carried, needed him alive for interrogation, needed to trace the full network. Evidence would disappear, the network would scatter, 14 operatives would remain compromised. Option was to disable the motorcycle. Engine block was too small, moving target, low probability of hit. Better target was the front tire, larger surface area, would crash him but survivable if he had any skill. Sarah controlled her breathing with the rhythm she had learned at the Olympics and perfected in combat zones, where a single shot meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 4. Her heart rate slowed from 140 beats per minute to 85, the physiological response that separated Olympic athletes from everyone else. Crosshairs settled on the front tire, tracking the motorcycle's position. She led the target, aiming not at where Reed was but where he would be, calculating acceleration and trajectory, and the 3-second gap between trigger pull and impact. Her finger found the trigger, steady pressure, the kind of squeeze that came from 10,000 hours of practice. Time dilated in the way it always did when Sarah was behind a scope. The world narrowed to crosshairs, target, breath. Everything else fell away. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, familiar recoil absorbed through proper stance. 3 seconds passed while the bullet crossed 300 meters. Sarah tracked through the scope, watching, waiting, already knowing the shot was good before impact confirmed it. The front tire exploded in a spray of rubber and compressed air. The motorcycle flipped forward, physics and momentum combining to catapult Reed over the handlebars. He landed hard, body rolling across dirt and grass, coming to rest in a crumpled heap that didn't move for 3 seconds. Sarah was already running, rifle ready, covering 300 meters in 68 seconds, her sprint capability tested and proven. She arrived to find Reed on his back, conscious, groaning, left arm bent at an angle that suggested fracture. Sarah kept her weapon trained on him while checking for weapons with her free hand. She found a pistol in his jacket and kicked it away, then spoke with absolute authority. "Thomas Reed, you are under arrest for espionage." Reed's response came dazed, confused, pain and realization mixing in his voice. "What? No. I'm working for Martinez," said. Then understanding crossed his face like a shadow, the moment when everything he believed shattered. "Oh God, he set me up." Major Reeves arrived 20 minutes later with a military police unit, vehicles appearing from the darkness with lights and personnel, and the machinery of military justice grinding into motion. Reed was in custody within minutes, crying, confessing everything in a desperate attempt to save himself from charges that carried life sentences. Or worse. Martinez was extracted from the ridge, also in custody, also singing immediately because there was no honor among traitors and no loyalty strong enough to withstand what came next. At 2,130 hours, Sarah sat in the command post with Colonel Brooks and Major Reeves, conducting a post-action debrief that would be classified at the highest levels and buried in files that few people would ever see. The network was larger than initial intelligence suggested. Martinez had recruited 3 other soldiers as couriers over 8 months of operation. They had sold classified intelligence for $2.3 million split among them. Foreign buyers included confirmed connections to Russian SVR, the intelligence service that never stopped hunting for American secrets. The intel recovered from Reed's USB drive contained exactly what Brooks had warned about: identities of 14 deep-cover operatives, including Sarah's real assignments, the missions she had run in places that didn't officially exist, the operations that would be denied if anyone ever asked. "You saved lives tonight, Captain." Agents in the field who'll never know how close they came. Brooks's voice carried the weight of command and genuine gratitude. The complete network will take weeks to unravel. Martinez's handler in the SUV is still at large, but we have license plate, description, digital forensics, tracking financial transactions. Sarah's cover identity could never be used again. Her face was now known, her capabilities documented, her status as Olympic medalist and Special Operations Captain a matter of record that couldn't be hidden. What happens to the recruits? Morrison, Elena, the others? Sarah asked the question that mattered to her more than medals or commendations. They complete training. They'll be fine soldiers. Brooks's answer was simple, certain. And me? You've been undercover for 3 years total. Time to come in from the cold. The words carried finality. The end of one chapter and the beginning of whatever came next. At 2,200 hours, a small gathering assembled in the mess hall, invited by Colonel Brooks, personnel who knew some of what had happened, but not the classified details that would remain buried. Morrison and Elena and David Park and Sergeant Webb and others. An atmosphere of respect and camaraderie mixed with distance because they understood now that Captain Sarah Chen operated on a different level, lived in a different world, carried burdens they could only imagine. Elena approached first, her voice carrying admiration mixed with awe. That shot, 300 meters, moving target in the dark. Sarah corrected the details with the precision that defined everything she did. 312 meters, and it was the easy part. What's the hard part? Living with all of it. The answer was honest, vulnerable. The first time Sarah had let them see past the operator to the person underneath. Morrison joined them, standing awkwardly until words came. "I'm sorry. For all of it. The trip in the mess hall, the comments. You were reacting to what you saw. I was lying to everyone." Sarah's response absolved him of guilt he didn't need to carry. "Still, you could have broken me in half a dozen times." "I counted 8. The slight smile that crossed Sarah's face was genuine, the humor dark, but real. David Park raised a cup of coffee and toast, his gesture carrying more weight than the simple liquid could hold. "To Captain Chen, the worst runner and best shot in Army history." Laughter filled the space. Genuine warmth. Human connection in a profession that too often forgot the human part. Sarah accepted the toast with her own words. "To good soldiers who don't quit on each other." They drank together. The moment brief, but meaningful, bonds forged in shared experience, even if the full truth remained classified. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at Fort Carson rifle range in her actual uniform, with captain's bars visible, running a marksmanship clinic for advanced shooters. Elena Vasquez was there, having qualified as expert marksman. The dynamic between them different now. Mutual respect between professionals who understood what excellence required. In Colonel Brooks's office, a private ceremony took place with Brooks and Major Reeves and General Hartman, a 2-star base commander whose presence indicated the importance of what came next. Captain Chen, for actions above and beyond. This commendation for meritorious service. Brooks presented the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, but the words that followed mattered more than the medal itself. The 14 operatives whose identities were recovered. They're safe, extracted, or relocated. Because of you. That afternoon, Sarah packed to leave Fort Carson, transfer orders in hand, new assignment classified, destination undisclosed. Morrison and Elena came to say goodbye. Morrison's words carrying the weight of changed perspective. "Wherever they're sending you, those bad guys don't stand a chance. Stay safe out there, Morrison. Both of you." Sarah's response was simple, genuine. Elena spoke last. "You taught us something. About looking past the surface. You would have figured it out eventually." Sarah deflected the praise but accepted the connection. The reminder that even operators who lived in shadows needed people who saw them clearly. Sarah drove away from Fort Carson on a highway that stretched toward new assignments and new missions. Her mind reflecting on the past 3 weeks. Undercover. The humiliation had been necessary, had made her invisible, had allowed her to observe without being observed, but it had also reminded her that appearances deceive, that the weakest-looking person might be the strongest, that the most confident might be the most afraid, that surface and substance rarely aligned in the ways people assumed. She remembered the fitness test, crossing the finish line dead last, every step calculated, every gasping breath performed, fast enough to look genuinely exhausted, slow enough to seem incompetent, perfect control disguised as perfect failure. Sometimes the hardest test isn't showing what you can do. It's hiding it, and knowing when to reveal the truth. The thought crystallized everything she had learned, everything she had done, everything the mission had required. Sarah arrived at her new post at an undisclosed location and signed in at security. "Welcome, Captain Chen. They're expecting you." The guard's greeting was professional, routine. She walked through doors marked Special Operations Training Command, Instructor Division, understanding that her next mission was to train the next generation, to teach them that strength came in many forms, that competence wore many faces, that the best operators were the ones nobody saw coming. On a rifle range with a class of new recruits assembled before her, one of them asked the question that defined everything. "Captain, what's the most important thing about being a sniper?" Sarah's answer came from experience earned through Olympic medals and combat missions, and 3 years of living behind masks that hid who she really was. Patience, discipline, and never letting anyone see what you're really capable of. Until it matters most. She watched her students settle into firing positions, young soldiers learning skills that might save their lives or the lives of people they would never meet. Somewhere out there, another mission waited. another cover to assume, another test to fail on purpose. But today she was exactly who she was. Captain Sarah Chen, Olympic silver medalist, special operations sniper, instructor, operator, the woman who knew that the hardest victories came not from showing strength, but from hiding it until the moment when revelation changed everything. And that was enough.